Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm working on the new pattern my patrons selected by vote. This is actually my third attempt, and even though I'm getting closer, I'm still not totally happy with it, so the focus of today's video is why it's important to test every pattern before you sew a finished garment, and how to fix it if it doesn't quite work. This dress still has a few major fit issues. The front looks pretty nice, but if I flip it over you can see I must have miscalculated something in the hips because it won't close across the back. There just isn't enough material. And when we look at the sides, the armholes have big gaps that really negatively impact how this fits around the arm and across the bust. On top of that, the seams that are supposed to be the side are too far forward. So this seam should be right down the center of a doll's side. You see the gapping of the armhole here too. It's inside out here for ease of adjustment. I recommend trying most tests on this way. So how do we fix these problems? Most of the time, fit issues are resolved at the side seams because the side of a garment is the least visible. In order to eliminate gapping at the armhole, I already determined I'm going to need to add a dart to make it angle back a little bit sharper. I've folded the pattern piece to test how this will look. The extra flap of fabric at the arm will be eliminated that way. This also works well with fixing the next problem, which is making this piece wider, so that the side seam will be pushed farther back. It's also much too tight through the torso. Skin-tight clothing can look nice, but dolls need extra room to be able to move. This is so snug that I can't shift her torso joint at all. So because this piece needs a lot of adjustments, I'll start by tracing it onto a scrap of newsprint, and then make adjustments to a new version of this piece. Anytime you make something using a pattern that's not designed specifically for your doll's sculpt, it's a good idea to use scrap fabric to make a mock-up that can be adjusted for fit. Most of the time you'll hear this referred to as making a muslin. These days, muslin fabric can be just as expensive as anything else, so I keep things like old curtains and bed sheets to use for testing patterns. Where the dart on this piece needs to be added, I mark and sketch the dart based on placement I determined by pulling the fabric tight on the doll's chest and pinning it in place. When adding a dart, it's important to check to make sure it doesn't change how pieces fit together. In my case, I'm incredibly fortunate that I need to make this piece wider. Adding a 1/2 inch wide dart like this means the armhole needs to be made 1/2 inch larger so that the sleeve will still fit. But this means it's an easy adjustment, because I'm already making the side deeper. I add 1/2 inch more width to this piece by expanding at the side seam. This means this will make the fit across the torso loose enough to pose the doll. It'll hold the fabric closer to the body at the armhole, and it'll help close the gap in the back. But the gap also needs a little extra help. To add width at the doll's hips, I need to know where the hips are. So I measure the original piece that's still on the doll, going over the fullest part of the bust and making note of where the hips begin to slope outward. That's where the problem in the fit begins. I measured down the curvy front edge of the pattern piece to mark this point on my revised drawing. Now I have to figure out what to do to add width to the skirt. I could add to the front edge, which would fix the fit, but it would change the profile of the dress a lot by being in a more visible place. I don't want to do that, and I also don't want to sacrifice the updated placement of the side seam. So the next best option is adding more fullness to the back of the dress. This pattern has a side back piece as well. If I mark the hip point on this, I can take some scraps of newsprint and expand the skirt on the side back panel too. Most patterns I make take 2 or 3 drafts, but sometimes I've had stubborn patterns that need 6 or more revisions before they fit just right. Another 1/2 inch of expansion should do it. I play around with a few options, such as making the skirt a lot wider, but I worry about that changing the profile of the dress too. However, on a pattern like this, 1/2 inch is a lot to angle out straight from the waist. So I compromise by adding 1/2 inch to the lower part of the panel, and from the waist up I add 1/4 inch. I even this out with an angled line between the swell of the hip and the narrowest part of the waist. This adds a little more looseness around the doll's torso, and adds a bit of space to the armhole as well. So that means the sleeve will also need to be adjusted. Not by a lot, just the 1/4 inch that was added to the side panel. So I add 1/8 of an inch to either side of the upper sleeve, and 1/8 of an inch to the top of the lower sleeve piece, so that it will still fit to the upper sleeve. It's important to consider how every piece will be affected in the process. Once you've made your adjustments, you'll want to compare the edges of your pieces to make sure they're still the same length, so that you know they'll still fit together appropriately. And remember that changes you make to the pattern are bilateral, so if I add 1/2 inch to the hip on this side panel, I'm actually adding a full inch to the width of the garment because that addition is mirrored on the other side of the dress. I secure all my added bits of paper so I can trace these onto something nicer later. The next step is going back to testing. The tutorial for this dress will be coming soon, so I won't share the sewing process here. What really matters in this video is the fit. The side seams are much better centered now, and there's enough space in the dress that the doll can move. The armhole no longer gaps. Oops, back magnets. And of course, the skirt is now full enough that the back closes. I turn the material right side out for further inspection. It's important to adjust how the fabric lays on the doll when sitting her up, because now that the fabric isn't skin tight, it looks like the armholes are still too far forward. Once I adjust how it's laying, like the dress will fit when it has proper closures and such, it fits really nicely. When I sew the final dress, I may make a few tailored adjustments to the final piece, but these alterations to the base pattern have been successful. From here, I can move on to finishing the pattern. After all, I still have the collar to complete. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.